Yeah, hi there. These comments are for Rafat. This is Michael, the founder, owner, and the materials writer for the 7-step system to pass the TOEFL IBT, and you just completed the independent practice test number 9, and also you've paid for the additional service to have me error correct all of your essays, and that's exactly what I'm going to do right now. So let's take a look at the question first. It says, you need to travel from your home to a place 40 miles away. Compare the different kinds of transportation you could use. Tell which method of travel you would choose. Give specific reasons for your choice. So this is really kind of like a two-part task. The first part of the question is to compare the different types of transportation. And then the second part of the question is to tell which method of travel you would choose. All right, let's get started with your first paragraph. You say, many people prefer to spend their holidays by traveling. I would say traveling to, not for. So traveling to any, I wouldn't say there, just say it's a little bit wordy. Traveling to places like gardens and beaches. And just say here maybe using many forms of transportation such as buses, trains, or even their own cars. It depends on, maybe here, you might say, it depends on how far. I would probably say something like this. Which form of transportation one might use. So you might say which form of transportation one might use depends on how far. I wouldn't say is the place, because when you're using a noun clause, you want to use connector, subject, verb, word order. You don't want to use the verb plus subject word order because it is now a dependent clause. So how far maybe the place is. Wants to reach, maybe. You could probably just use, instead of the impersonal one, you could probably say which form of transportation I might use depends on how far the place is that I want to reach. And then you might say if it is 40 miles, or less, you might say it'll be, how about, you already said as a practical way to be used as my own car. That's a little bit wordy. You might say it will be more practical to travel by car. So then we can delete this sentence here, which is not really needed. For example, you say it is easier to move at the time which prefer to go, not by schedule, prepared for by, like in case of using buses or trains. I would say that this idea I don't think you really need at this point. Giving an example in your introduction I don't think is going to work very well, because the main thing you want to do in the thesis is you want to set up where you include some general statements about the topic first, and then you get into your thesis. And if you use an example after the thesis, it makes it a little bit confusing. So then if I get to the second paragraph, I might say, you say forms of transportation are useful and have many benefits to use. That's not going to work very well, because if we go back to your thesis, you say buses, trains, or cars. So you want to start off with what's called buses. You might want to say, I might decide to use the bus if I do not need to travel very far. For example, maybe I want to travel from my to my job (21 miles away). So then if I take the bus, I will be able to avoid traffic, and it will only cost about $1.50 for a two-way trip using the bus. Something along those ways. So the thing is, if you compare the different modes of transportation, what you want to do is, based on your thesis, is talk about the bus in one paragraph, talk about the train in another paragraph, and then talk about your car and why you prefer that as the best mode of transportation. So I'm going to get rid of this. This whole paragraph here does not work very well at all. Okay, so let's see what we have so far with paragraph 3. It says, I might decide to use the bus if I do not need to travel very far. For example, maybe I want to travel from my neighborhood to my job, which is about 21 miles away. If I take the bus, I will be able to avoid traffic, and it will cost about $1.50 for maybe two-way trip using the bus. Then you might say something like, in addition to not being costly, if I take the bus, I will be able to do leisurely reading without worrying about the hassles of driving a car. Okay, so the next thing is, once you've talked about the bus, you now need to talk about the train. Remember, the question says, compare the different kinds of transportation you could use, right? So when you compare, you discuss the different forms of transportation. You might want to say, my second option when I travel is to take a train. You might want to say, like the bus, the train is also convenient in that it allows me to avoid traffic. It allows me to avoid traffic. So it's also convenient in that it allows me to avoid traffic The train does not have to stop at traffic signals or stop signs. Something like that. You might say, in addition, the train cost a little bit more than the bus. For example, if I want to travel from my house to my work, a two-way ticket will cost me about, we'll say, $8. I'm going to say, comparatively speaking, the train will save me about 20 minutes. When I go to work. So then we have our next idea. It says, let's look at this fourth paragraph here. Say, my second option when I travel is to take a train. Like the bus, the train is also convenient and that it allows me to avoid traffic, especially since the train does not have to stop at traffic signals or stop signs. Comparatively speaking, the train is about 20 minutes faster than the bus when I go to work. However, the train costs a little bit more than the bus. For example, if I want to travel from my house to my work, a two-way ticket will cost me about $8. Okay, so far, we've adequately made some comparisons. We've looked at the bus first. Secondly, we've looked at the train. We discussed kind of the advantages of each. And then we want to get to the final paragraph, which is which one you like. Then you might use a transition, say, despite the advantages of taking the bus or the train, you might want to say, using my own car has many benefits and it's better. I would say better for me, not to me. It's the best way to feel free of scheduled you might say something like this. Unlike the bus or the train, you might say, both of which leave at designated schedules, when I use my car, can leave whenever I want. That's kind of what you're trying to say there, right? Then you might use a transition, say, furthermore, I can save at least two things. Now, if I save at least two things, two is you're using kind of what's called a forecast statement, which means you should probably use first and then second, right? And that would help cue the reader, keep the reader focused on what you're trying to do and make that paragraph a little bit more organized. So you say, furthermore, I can save at least two things. I'd put a period here, not a comma, to avoid the run-on. Say, first, if I use my own car, I save, of course, time. I would just put I save time, which it is. No. When you're using the word which is your relative cause pronoun, which refers to time, right? Time is very important for you. So the connector is replacing the word which is in a subject position, which means you don't need another subject. So you just say which is important to me. I don't think you need the rest of that. Say second, it is better to spend an interesting and exiting time during my travels. I can spend a good time at restaurants to take some rest during my trip. Okay, so you control your destination, you're trying to say. If you're taking the car, unlike the bus or the train, you stop when you want, right? So you're saying because you have more freedom, you can make it more exciting. Your trip is more exciting to you. This is kind of what you're trying to say, right? Okay, let's see if we can figure out how you need to say this. So second, since maybe taking the car allows me more flexibility to stop, allows me more flexibility. I can have a more interesting and exciting time during my travels. Then you might say, for example, if I want, I can spend a good time at restaurants or take rests whenever I want during my trip. Okay, so I think we're getting there. Okay, so let's highlight the actual question. Let me put that in red so we can see that. Okay, so the question is in red, and let's go back to the fourth paragraph. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4. You might say number 4, despite the advantages of taking the train or the bus, using my own car has many benefits, and it is better for me. Unlike the bus or the train, both of which leave at designated schedules, when I use my car, I can leave whenever I want. Furthermore, I can save at least two things. First, if I use my own car, I can save time, which is important to me. Second, since taking a car allows me more flexibility, I can maybe have a more interesting, exciting time during my travels. For example, if I want, I can spend a good time at restaurants or take rest whenever I want during my trip. And then you have your conclusion. It looks good. So what I've done here, Rafat, is I took what you wrote and I had to restructure it a little bit so that it focused more on the question and it also connected better to your thesis. Okay, let's look at your conclusion. It says always, there is. No, I'm going to say are. Because when you're using the word there, you don't know what your subject is until after the verb. So there are many choices, not is. There are many choices for traveling. Then you say, but, in my opinion, to go by my own car is the best way. Good, that works. So you're using, in this case, you have what's called a compound sentence. You're using but. You're joining two different independent clauses on both sides of that. And you have, it looks like, an infinitive you're using as your subject in the second part of the sentence. You say, always, there are many choices for traveling, but in my opinion, to go by my own car is the best way. Not all opinions are the same because it is, I think you want to say, traveling is, I'm going to put a completely personal experience, not completely a. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that. And what we're doing here is when you're using a, right, then you have the adverb, then you have the adjective, and then you have the noun. So that's usually a more typical word order for what you're trying to do. So you say not all opinions are the same because traveling is a completely personal experience, but I feel comfort to do this so far. No, just say I feel comfort in choosing the car over the other two modes of transportation. That would be probably the way I would say that. So you might say the advantages by bus or by train. I think we got it. Okay, now let's do a spell check. Let's see how we're doing. Traveling has one L, so we change that again. Buses has one S. Okay, now let's read it one more time. I think we have this exactly how we need it now. Paragraph 1. Many people prefer to spend their holidays by traveling to places like gardens and beaches, using many forms of transportation, such as buses, trains, or even their own cars. Which form of transportation I might use depends on how far the place is that I want to reach. If it is 40 miles or less, it'll be more practical to travel by car. Paragraph 2. I might decide to use the bus if I do not need to travel very far. For example, maybe I want to travel from my neighborhood to my job, which is about 21 miles away. If I take the bus, I will be able to avoid traffic, and it will cost about $1.50 for a two-way trip using the bus. In addition to not being costly, if I take the bus, I will be able, to do some leisurely reading without worrying about the hassles of driving a car. My second option when I travel is to take a train. Like the bus, the train is also convenient in that it allows me to avoid traffic, especially since the train does not have to stop at traffic signals or stop signs. Comparatively speaking, the train is about 20 minutes faster than the bus when I go to work. However, the train costs a little bit more than the bus. For example, if I want to travel from my house to my work, a two-way ticket will cost me about $8. Now, the fourth paragraph. Despite the advantages of taking the bus or the train. Now what I just did here is very important, Rafat, because this is called a transition. And the purpose of the first part of this sentence is to connect paragraph 4 to paragraph 2 and 3. And we do that by saying what I just said. Again, despite the advantages of taking the bus or the train, using my own car has many benefits, and it is better for me. Unlike the bus or the train, both of which leave it at designated schedules, when I use my car, I can leave whenever I want. Furthermore, I can save at least two things. First, if I use my car, I can save time, which is important to me. Second, since taking the car allows me more flexibility, I can have a more interesting and exciting time during my travels. For example, if I want, I can spend a good time at restaurants or take rest whenever I want during my trip. Maybe here you might want to say, to sum up. I'm using this as a transition word to signal that we are coming to an end with these ideas. To sum up, always there are many choices for traveling, but in my opinion, to go by my own car is the best way. Not all opinions are the same because traveling is a completely personal experience, but I prefer to travel by car despite the advantages of traveling by bus or by train. Now, with your essay, I think the biggest issue of your writing, will be, I don't think that you really adequately answered the first part of the question. You notice I had to restructure your essay quite a bit. So because of that, I'm going to give you 2.0 out of 4, or right around, actually 2.0 out of, maybe 2.5 out of 5. So maybe 17 to 18 points out of 30 on this particular writing practice test. So I think the main thing that you want to get out of this is, first and foremost, is you need to directly address the writing task. And I know that you're asking me a while back, you're saying, well, Michael, what's the difference between organizing independent and integrated writing tasks? It all depends on what the question is. The question will dictate how you need to organize your responses. So your question I can't really answer. What I need to tell you is you need to look at what the question is and then figure out the best way to organize that particular response. All right? So anyway, thank you for doing the assignment. Obviously, it's good to hear from you again, and keep up the good work.